Hello, welcome to tonight's webinar. This is an interactive online experience and we want to hear from you. You can participate by asking questions, answering poll questions, and completing interactive activities. The majority of our time will be spent answering your questions. Let's spend a moment getting to know this Q&A environment. On your screen, you'll see the video and slides window and their corresponding icons. Should you want to minimize either, you can just click the icon, and you can also resize each of the windows. You will also see a studio chat tab and button. That is where you can engage in conversation with fellow attendees. And most importantly, you'll see the Q&A tab. That is where you can ask us questions. All of our Q&As and webinars this year are accessible on computers, tablets, and smartphones, so you can even take us on the go. When you click on the resources icon, you'll find documents and other information that we'll mention during today's discussion. We'll also ask you to respond to some poll questions, which you'll see appear in the slides window. And at the conclusion of tonight's Q&A, please take a few minutes to complete our survey. It will automatically appear on your screen. Let's get started. Good evening and welcome to Age Proof Your Career Q&A Part 2. My name is Janae Wheeler and I'll be your host for this evening. I'm delighted to be joined once again by Heather Tinsley-Fix, Senior Advisor at AARP, and Lori McCann, Senior Attorney with AARP Foundation Litigation. Welcome back, Heather and Lori.
Thanks, Janae.
Thank you.
During this week's two-part Q&A, we're providing you with simple tips and answering your questions about how you can age-proof your career. If you joined us for Part 1 of our discussion on Tuesday, welcome back. If you are unable to attend the session, you can watch it on demand at any time. The link is available in the resources folder. For Part 2 of our discussion, we'll continue to answer your questions and discuss how you can age-proof your career through networking, interviewing, building and leveraging a support network, staying confident and relevant, and more. You can ask a question at any time about how you can age-proof your career. Just type your question in the Q&A box on your screen. We want to begin with an open-ended question. How are you age-proofing your career? You can type your answer to this question in the group chat box on your screen. We'll share your comments throughout tonight's discussion. We're going to get started by answering some of your most frequently asked questions from Part 1 of our conversation. Ladies, are you ready? Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Sure. Well, we have our first question from Lee. And in his scenario, he was encouraged to retire much earlier than planned based on company downsizing. And after that, he took 3 years to care for his aging parents in his home. Should he mention the reason for that on his resume?
On his resume?
Yeah, should he mention the reason for that gap?
On his resume? I wouldn't mention it on your resume. What I might do is mention it in the summary statement in your LinkedIn profile, which is like a paragraph below your profile picture. And when you're in interviews, I would definitely address it, and I would show the positive side of it. First of all, it's fantastic that you stayed at home to care for your parents. AARP supports family caregivers, and so I can't imagine an employer or a potential employer looking negatively on that revelation. So I would definitely be brief, but honest about it.
Awesome. Thinking about interviews and being in the digital age and things changing now, Nancy has a question about online interviews, Skype interviews versus in-person interviews. Is there a difference on how she should act between the two?
Have you ever had a Skype interview, Lori?
I have never had a Skype interview.
I haven't either, but I think a couple of things you can do. I wouldn't answer questions any differently. I don't think you act any differently, but a few things. One is that you want to make sure that you are, like, in terms of your background, you want to pay attention to that. Make sure the lighting is good when you're on the screen. I would get a headset so that when you answer questions, you're not, a wireless one would be best so that you don't have a wire dangling down, but so that you're not distracted and leaning in to try and answer the questions. Another thing that might be really tough, I find this so difficult when I'm Skyping, but look at the camera hole on your computer and not down at the bottom of the screen where you appear. You should actually stack your laptop up on a pile of books so that you are level with the camera. As a tall person, I know this from experience. It's not a good look to be looked at from this angle. Handle tech glitches gracefully. If they come up, don't panic. Just roll with it. But other than that, I would say just answer the questions as you normally would.
Awesome. What about written assignments? Looks like she's also had interviews through written assignments.
Yeah, that's actually becoming much more common. Employers are really keen to make sure that you're a good fit for the company, and they're also trying to combat bias because, if you hire just on gut, you can actually diminish the diversity in your company. So one of the ways to get around that is to actually ask people to perform some of the tasks that they might perform in that job. So a written assignment is actually a great way to showcase how you'd be good at that job. And I don't know any way to prepare for it, but just do the assignment and do your best.
Those are some great tips. Thank you for sharing it. Now, Lori, this question's going to be directed toward you. It's from Gail, and she wants to know, how should she negotiate a previous salary that she had with a new employer? She has a feeling that they might think she's too expensive.
Sure, it's a common concern for older workers, and I'm going to eventually turn it over to Heather to talk about the whole salary and negotiation piece, but I did want to point out that it's a very timely issue, that many states and some cities have passed legislation that actually prohibit an employer from asking you about your salary history. And the reasoning behind these initiatives is that of wage inequality, that many women have historically been underpaid for their positions compared to similarly situated men who are doing the same jobs. So AARP supports these initiatives, but for the additional reason that it helps older workers too, who, because they may have been in the same position for a long time, may be making a higher salary, and that if they disclose that higher salary, the employer may be deterred from hiring them, even though they may be willing to take a lower salary. And you might have something to add about the whole salary negotiation piece.
Yeah. So for absolutely everything Lori said is I echo all of that. And then I would say don't get into salary discussions until well into the interview process. Companies should be offering pay for a position that is commensurate, like relates to that position, right? So, and usually there's a range. So once you start discussing salary, you can certainly ask the range, and then bring all of that great experience you have and all of the stuff you bring to the table to bear in terms of your negotiation, maybe in the upper end of that range if that's what you require. But it's really important to remember that the jobs that you apply for, you should have a sense, and you can look for this on Glassdoor and other places, that it is in a range that you need. Because, as I said, the salaries should be relative to the job you're applying for.
Just one final point. I have seen in some age discrimination cases that if an employer doesn't hire the older applicant and the employer's justification for doing so is salary, and the older worker can show that they did offer to work for whatever the salary was, they didn't expect the higher salary they were making at the other position, that can be evidence of age discrimination, the fact that they had expressed a willingness to take a lower salary.
Wow. Well, I'm glad to hear, as well as I'm sure everyone else, that there are strides being made for compensation equality in the market. Mm-hmm. Now, let's say you've been on the job hunt and you're not feeling successful. Heather, in part one, you talked a lot about, how you can combat being disenchanted in your job search. Sarita has been job hunting now for 2 years, and she's beginning to feel inadequate for any job at this point. How can she stay hopeful?
Yeah, that is tough. I actually dealt with this earlier on in my career, so I sympathize with your situation. I think certainly the first and most important thing is to find a support network of people who are in the same situation that you're in. Another thing to do, I find, is good is to review your resume and just remember all of the great skills that you do have. Sometimes repeating those back to yourself and practicing your elevator pitch can help boost your confidence. And then I would say maybe think about taking a class. I mean, look at some of the skills that are required for the jobs that you're interested in, and think about boosting your knowledge in them, or taking a new or acquiring a new skill, because the act of just taking one small step to increase your skill base can sometimes have a kind of like a slingshot effect on your confidence, and can boost you forward, get you engaged with your job search again, or with what you're learning, and really help lift your outlook.
Awesome. I like how you touched on having a support network. I want to take a question about networking. Richard wants to know, should networking efforts ever be initiated by phone or by email?
Yeah, I think email is probably the good place to start. The exception to that would be if the person that you're reaching out to is connected to someone that you know very well, then a phone call might be fine. But I would say start with email, and definitely don't do it by text.
Want it to be more formal, not so casual, right?
Exactly. Oh, I apologize. I don't want to interrupt you, Janae, but you can also reach out over LinkedIn, and that's done kind of through their app. So that's a really great way, and that's absolutely expected. So that's another really good way to reach out.
That is. I'm glad you brought up LinkedIn. Lori, a question directed towards you. Deb is thinking about, age discrimination. She's getting older. And do you find that age discrimination gets worse or gets tougher as an applicant gets older? An example, maybe when they're in their 60s?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I believe it does. And in fact, that's why Congress, when it enacted the Age Discrimination and Employment Act 50 years ago, it opted to establish a minimum age, so 40, versus saying they wanted to prohibit discrimination at any age. They recognized that this was a problem of older people, not younger people, and that it did get worse with increasing age. And that's why in 1986, they eliminated the age cap from its protections altogether, knowing that discrimination continues. And I think, based on the fact that it does seem to get worse, it makes it especially important to keep your work-related skills and knowledge up to date, and to seek out, be a lifelong learner, seek out training and other opportunities to show your employer or potential employers in the job search situation that you are still very engaged in work and in learning, and that all those stereotypes of older workers do not apply to you.
Awesome. That's great advice, to be a lifelong learner, trying new things, learning new things. Sharita has a question, and it looks like one of her techniques, maybe in trying new things. She wants to know, can making an intro video responding to some of the top 10 interview questions be beneficial for her? What do you think?
That's an interesting idea. I will say that unless the interview process calls for it, and as we've been talking about, the interview process has changed a lot, and so they might ask for different things. But if the interview process calls for it, definitely do it. But I wouldn't do it otherwise. I'm not sure it's an expected element in the recruiting process, and might throw a recruiter off. So you could make it just for practice, though. That would be good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. You spoke about the interview process. Now, what if you're in an interview, and like Lucy, she wants to know, is it legal to ask when you're going to retire? This is a question she actually had in a recent interview.
I'll take that question. It's not per se illegal for the interviewer to ask that question. It raises a lot of red flags. And if Lucy weren't to be hired for that position, and she found out that a younger person who was less qualified than her, or even as qualified as her, got the position instead of her, I think the fact that the interviewer asked that question is strong evidence of age discrimination. Now, Lucy wants a job. She doesn't want a good age discrimination case. We all want the job, not a good case. So what I would say is Lucy and others need to be prepared for those type of what we would call difficult interview questions. So when the person asks, when do you plan to retire? I don't think it's the right thing to just get very confrontational and say, well, that's evidence of age discrimination. I would deflect the question by saying, I have no current plans to retire, and that's why I'm interviewing for this position, and tell them how excited you are about the position and how you expect to be in that position for a long time.
Excellent. I think that's just a prime answer to give. Thank you for sharing it. How about disability? If you've been on disability for over a year, like John has, how would you explain that employment gap to a potential employer?
Again, I would say in the case of the caregiver, that you want to be honest about it. You don't want to hide it, and try and find a way to explain it in a way that is either positive or sort of tactful. So in your case, I might say, I needed to take some time off to take care of my health, and I'm back in fighting form. I'm feeling better than ever, and I'm ready to jump back into it. So that you can be brief. You don't have to give a ton of information, but you just need to address it truthfully and positively.
Just to add on, in fact, the Americans with Disability Act would prohibit them from asking too many probing questions about your disability. So it's, fine to say that was the reason, and then they really should, accept your answer and not ask many probing questions about any disability.
That's good to know. Thank you for sharing those great insights, ladies. And thank you all for your questions. One of the most common questions we've received during this week's Q&As are about different types of resumes. So let's watch a quick video to learn more.
Your resume should highlight the best of you and your work experience. Did you know that there are 3 main types of resumes? The first type of resume is the most common. This is a chronological resume. Chronological resumes work well if you have a long and steady history of work and want to remain in your current field. To make this resume work best, list your work experience beginning with your most recent positions and keep your history to the past 15 years. You'll want to list job titles, employers, and years of employment. The second resume format is called a functional resume. This showcases your skills and accomplishments more than your work history. It's a good choice if you have gaps in your employment or are looking to make a career change. The best strategy for creating a functional resume is to focus on your major skills, including those from your hobbies or volunteering. Be sure to tailor your resume to each job that you apply for by listing the most relevant skills first. Following your list of skills and accomplishments, include a short job history including employer name, position, and years worked. The third format to consider is a combination resume. This resume is the most flexible. A combination resume includes elements of both a chronological and functional resume. If you feel that neither of those resume types are a perfect fit for you, you may want to try combining elements of those to best highlight your abilities and experience. No matter which resume type you choose, be sure to tailor your resume for each job application. Mirror relevant keywords from the job posting to show that your skills are what the company is looking for. Use these keywords throughout your resume when referring to job titles, experience, career objectives, or training. Taking the time to consider the format of your resume allows you to show yourself in the best possible light when applying for jobs.
Answer many of your questions. You can learn more about resumes by visiting aarp.org/job search. Let's get to some more of your questions. So here's a great question I'd love to hear the answer to myself. Victor wants to know, should he worry about what he posts on Facebook and other social media channels? Are hiring managers actually looking at that content?
They absolutely, definitely are. So you do want to be careful about what you post on Facebook or any of the social platforms. One thing to note is you should investigate the privacy settings in Facebook because you can hide some things and show other things. So that if that helps with your decision making about what you post, that's a tip. But definitely stay away from controversial topics and past jobs. Don't talk badly about your former boss. But vacation pictures and things like that are fine. The reason recruiters do look at your social profile is to kind of ascertain that you are who you say you are, and yes, it is to get a feel for who you are. But it's sort of the social proof that you exist and that you're legitimately who you say you are.
Awesome. Great. I'll make sure my posts are tip-top. A question from Diane. Oftentimes on an interview, interviewers ask, do you have any questions? Do you have some examples of what good questions you can ask at the end of an interview?
Yeah, I would say, let's see, that's a good question. I would ask, what sort of a typical day is like in the job that you're applying for. I would ask, what's the social life like around the office? That might be a good one to ask. I would also ask what you think the top challenges are facing that organization. And then when they answer, see if there's anything in your background that you can bring to bear on that challenge, because that's a really great way of strengthening your candidacy for the job. Those are some things I can think of off the top of my head, but I would imagine if you Google that question, you'll get a lot of great articles on which questions to ask. And you definitely don't want to ask about salary at that point. You don't want to ask what's the next step. So those are some things that you don't want to ask at that time. But yeah, if you Google that question, I am sure you will find a lot of really great content on it.
I love the questions that you provided. It really shows that you're insightful about the company and you want to see what it's like to work there without being, intrusive, going to the next level, saying, well, what's the salary? What's the next step? Awesome.
Yeah.
So you've been working for a company, and like Lori, she says, what should someone do if they've been terminated at any point during their working career? I think it's a great question for you, Lori.
Well, if you think the termination was based on your age, you need to know that there are important time limits for filing a charge of discrimination with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And generally, you have between 180 and 300 days to file a charge of discrimination. One important thing to keep in mind is the time for filing a charge usually begins running from when you learn of the discriminatory action. So if I'm told you're going to be fired and your last day is in 2 weeks, the time starts to run when I'm told I'm going to lose my job in 2 weeks, not in 2 weeks. That's only if, you think that age or another protected category might be involved. Otherwise, you need to start looking for your next job immediately. I know that when my husband was laid off, he had a list of projects he was going to do around the house, and I told him he needed to put those aside because of his age and what I do for a living. I knew that this was not going to be your typical job search, even though he was a highly qualified engineer, and that it was going to take a little longer. So get back in the saddle immediately and start looking for the next job.
That is such a great piece of advice.
Absolutely. Now, let's say you've been at home for a while. Heather, this question's for you from Victoria. She's worked for 23 years at home, homeschooling her children and caring for them. And she also worked as a mental health counselor. So how does she get back into that field of mental health? How should she word raising her children as a career?
Well, I always like to say that if you have a great history of raising children, then you're eminently qualified to work anywhere, because human beings are prickly and they don't change. And if you can take care of little ones, you can certainly interact with people at the office. So one of the things, though, I would recommend is to look up they're called returnship programs. This is a term that was coined by Goldman Sachs, and they've really proliferated. And returnship programs tend to be specifically geared towards helping women return to the workforce after taking time off for childcare or elder care. And there's a company called iRelaunch that you can check out, because they actually have a sort of a handbook on how to go through the applying for a returnship process, and that's great. As a matter of fact, if you're looking for a job at all, that handbook and that sort of process they follow has a lot of great tips for just how to get back into the job market. But check out returnships. That's a really good way to get back after such a long absence.
Awesome. If you're applying for a lot of jobs, Suzanne wants to know, you have an option to upload your resume online. And do you recommend that they also submit a tailored cover letter for the position? She's afraid that if she includes it with her resume file, the document may now run on to 3 pages and it's going to be too long. She also may feel like she might just be overlooked if the file makes it out of the automated screening process. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think that it's probably best to include a cover letter when the application calls for it. And again, if you want to, because the recruiters are going to look at your LinkedIn profile, it's pretty much a dead certainty. So if you want to try and do kind of a mini cover letter in that paragraph underneath your profile picture, that's a good place to sort of tell more of your story. As Nora Duncan, our state office director in Connecticut, said in one of the earlier videos. So that's a good place to do it. But yeah, I agree. Usually if they ask for a cover letter, you will be uploading 2 documents, so you won't run into that this goes over 3 pages thing. So
Wonderful. Well, earlier we asked an open-ended question of you all, and I'd like to share some of your responses that were really great. Leslie said she's age-proofing her career by helping a friend at his podiatry practice. You mentioned on part 1 that it's great to volunteer, getting new skills and, exposure to new people and elements.
yep, absolutely. That's great.
Carolyn is age-proofing her career by staying active in her professional association. Wonderful. That's a great example of networking and continually to make new connections. Stephanie's constantly learning. Laura, you spoke to that about being a continued learner throughout your career. Carrie is setting up a non-Hotmail email address. Fantastic. Taking a great note from the video we shared about getting rid of Hotmail or AOL and staying up to date. Kathy is exploring certification programs. Fantastic. I think you both agree that staying current on industry standards is a wonderful way to expand your skills, right?
Absolutely.
Yes, and I would like to add something real there, if I could. Make sure that you research really well the certification program. You don't want to, if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So make sure that, because oftentimes certification programs you have to pay for them. So just do good research around the ones that you're interested in getting.
Excellent. I like that comment about doing the research, about getting new certifications, because Susan, she's open to new opportunities that she wouldn't have considered in the past. So new certifications can definitely play a part in that. David, he's emphasizing his achievement, earning his credentials. That's an excellent way to definitely toot your horn on your resume, right? Showing those accomplishments. Mm-hmm. Oh, I have another question from Michael. I think we may have a little bit of time. Mm-hmm. He would like to know, he's not worked in the past 7 years due to an illness, but now he's able to work again. How does he, at 60 years old, explain that on an interview?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, not to say the same thing over again, but I do think that, definitely be honest about it, and be brief. Don't need to go into too much detail. You can talk about how, your road to recovery has been for you, and you're back in fighting form and you're ready to get back into the job market. I would sort of spin it like that. It's very important to tell the truth, but also no need to tell the whole truth. You don't have to go into tons of detail.
Thinking about detail on resumes, we shared a video that talked about only having 15 years of experience on your resume. Well, Kalia, she's had 30 years experience with one particular company. So how does she reflect on her resume? Should she reflect it as a full 30? Should she only reflect it for the past 15? What would you say?
I would say leave dates off. What do you think?
I want to hear your answer, because I've worked the same place for 30 years. So.
Okay, so I would say definitely do a functional resume in that case. And one of the things that, especially if you've had a lot of positions at the same company, just list the company once and then list out the, not the jobs you've held there, but again, the functions that you've filled and the types of work you've done. So a functional resume can help you get over that. And you don't have to list the dates. You can just say present day, or you can, you can just list, like I said, the functions, and then underneath it there, you would list the job history very briefly.
Awesome.
Thanks. Yeah. But you're not going anywhere, please. Don't go anywhere. Okay, good.
Stay.
Yeah.
Well, everyone, it looks like we're out of time this evening. So let's take a look at some free resources. Our first is AARP Learn at 50 Plus Work and Jobs, which can be found at aarp.org/job search. Our next is AARP Work and Jobs, which can be found at aarp.org/work. We have for you our AARP job board, found at aarp.org/jobs. And our AARP Employer Pledge Program, found at aarp.org/employers. Heather and Lori, do you have any final tips for our audience?
I just hope that we've been able to offer some help, and I wish everybody success in their job searches and just to stay positive.
Excellent.
Yeah, and on kind of building off of that, I would say, looking for a job, it's often said, and this is really true, looking for a job is a full-time job in and of itself. So be really good to yourself and your body, get a lot of rest, nourish yourself with good food, and make sure you pay attention to your appearance. All of that stuff is going to help you be at the top of your game in terms of competing. So, and everybody, I want to wish everybody the best of luck, and please get in touch with us and let us know if you're in the job search and then you found a job. We would love to know that.
Absolutely, yes. As a reminder, you can access all of the links, including the on-demand version of this week's sessions and content mentioned this evening, by clicking on the resources icon. There you'll also find links to interactive videos and other helpful tips and tools to help you age-proof your career. Please make sure to take a few minutes to complete our survey. It will automatically appear on your screen in just a moment. I want to give a huge warm thank you to Heather Tinsley-Fix and Lori McCann for joining us this evening and giving us their great insights. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to everyone who joined us, thank you and have a great evening.